Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to Toe Tags Metal Reviews. And today we're going to be reviewing the new album from Tallah titled Matriphagy. So we've listened to this album for a week straight. Vile, what are your thoughts?
I'm going first. All right, let's do this. Okay, so had a lot of fun listening to this album. This is a really fun album to listen to. It's got an abundance of energy. It's explosive with energy, something I really love. It's got a lot of bounce to it. You listen to these songs and I'm sitting there like just thrashing my head around, just enjoying every second of it really. A lot of stuff is jam-packed in here. These guys are very creative, and this is one of those albums that you gotta pay attention to it or you're gonna miss stuff, okay? So, just to give you guys a couple examples. So the first one is coming to mind. I'm looking at my notes here because I took a little bit of notes throughout the week. Too Quick to Grieve, track number 9, okay? This song, really good song. All the songs grew on me quite a bit. Okay, this song's pretty good. There's little grunts and little vocal things that are happening throughout the song that I didn't really notice until later on in the week. And I went, wait a second, what was that? What was that? And I'm like, wow, like how did I not notice that after listening to it for the first dozen times? It just, you catch things all of a sudden. But one of my favorite things about this song is the breakdown outro. Now the breakdown outro, it's pretty heavy, goes hard, and there's a pretty like, you know, crunchy riff going along. And I like it. I like the riff, I like everything. But then I started noticing that every time they do the riff, they do a guitar, like a string slide or guitar slide, whatever the phrase is for the, you know, on the strings, right? And I was like, how did I not notice that before? But that's fucking cool. And they do it every time. I'm like, whoa, that's one of those things. And when you listen to a band, any band could have just played the riff through the outro and it would have been fine. But you add that little extra thing in there, it tells me that the band is thinking. They're thinking, how do we make this a little bit more flavorful? I appreciate that. Another thing I'll bring up, Overconfidence. Now, Overconfidence was the first video we reacted to. I wasn't too fond of it. I thought it was okay, but it wasn't killer for me. Well, now I think this track is killer. This track grew on me exponentially. I think Overconfidence is a fucking amazing song. And I give almost all that credit to Justin, the vocalist. And I think my reason for this is gonna sound kind of weird, it sound kind of dumb, maybe, but it's my reason, my reason, I don't care. When I was listening to the song, I started hearing how breathy he is throughout the song, specifically in the chorus. He's taking big gasping breaths, and I started going, wow, that sounds kind of bad, like what the fuck? But then, I'm noticing it's not really prominent throughout the rest of the album, which tells me that it was actually a design choice to do it like that on that song for effect. Respect. Because it adds to the character of the song. It gives you this perception that the person displaying this message is dealing with pain and anguish, and they're struggling with something. These gasping breaths just give it so much personality and depth. Really love that. These again are subtle things. If you're not paying attention, you're gonna miss them. And if you miss stuff like this, the album's just gonna fly by and you're gonna feel like, oh, this is just a generic, you know, new metal album kind of thing.
It's funny you mentioned like the gasping or whatever in that song, because you also kind of hear that in the silo as well.
Yeah.
But the difference with that is that when you hear him breathing, like doing like some panting, it sounds like there's a lot of adrenaline in the voice, and you know, given the context of that song and the story, it makes sense if you know what happens. So I also think that is a really strong point of this album, is the lyrical content and the story. You honestly don't really see a concept new metal album.
Nothing that comes to mind.
Yeah,
you know?
It never really comes to mind. So the fact that there's a complete story here, so you can obviously take the songs out of context and it works. You can look at the overarching themes and understand that it works, but it's awesome that, you know, there's a whole story here, and that Justin's vocal performance is just so, perhaps you could say, unpredictable, because he's got of like a million voices, tons of different stuff, and it totally displays how unstable the main character named Kungan is.
Right.
I think that's fucking awesome. Just how much dimension that adds and how much flavor there is in every single song. It's not like you hear the same thing every song. There's always something different being thrown your way, and I think that's great.
Exactly, and you know, we touched a little bit on the vocal diversity in the first impressions, but I'm just gonna emphasize it a little bit more here with some examples. So songs like track number 10, Cottonmouth, there's a pig squeal in that song.
I love that squeal. Dude.
Track number 13, Red Light, he's got a reverb on his voice, which just makes it sound different. Track number 3, Kungen, he does some scatting. There's songs, 2 or 3 different songs where he does raps. There's multiple songs where he does gutturals, and then there's like basically all the songs he has like this chaotic, just distressed voice that just makes all the songs work. And on top of that, or behind that I should say, you got Max just killing it, and these really crunchy, sometimes very droned out guitar riffs partnered by samples and synthy things going on in the background that just fill this atmosphere and really just give you a lot to listen to, give you a lot to take in. And there's really, like, I tried just really kind of focusing on this aspect, focusing on that aspect, and never being disappointed with what I was paying attention to, which is a testament to me of good musicianship and good writing.
That's another big thing I noticed about this album that makes it stand out, is how good the musicianship is. Because if you consider all of the raw animalistic energy that was in the nu metal albums of the late 90s, early 2000s, those musicians weren't really the most polished. Don't get me wrong, they sounded great, but you know, they weren't really the super tightest of bands. And some of those bands today are a lot tighter, but back then they weren't as much.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to see an album made with the same energy, the same just wild, unhinged energy, but these guys are super tight, super locked, like they sound super solid, and the mix is super solid too.
It is.
A lot of mixes from back then sounded really raw, but the mix here sounds very polished, but also a little bit raw at the same time, because if you hear Max's snare, there's a lot of like crack and ping in that. Like I don't think they really did much to the snare, and it works out because it's just such a hard ping to it.
In
You can hear
certain
the
songs, I will add in certain songs.
Yeah.
Because there's certain songs where it does sound like a more
raw sound, but
more
then
raw, and then
somewhere
some,
it doesn't. Yeah.
It sounds a little bit more, you know, speaking of that though, the sound of this guy's snare, the sound of the drums alone are fucking so sweet. So sweet. It brings me back, and this is like, obviously in the first impressions I was like, oh, it sounds like Slipknot, it sounds like Korn. That's why. It's things like that. The tuning of the guitars, which I'm not the greatest at knowing what the tuning is, but if I had to guess, I'd say they're playing in the same or similar tuning as a lot of Slipknot and Korn. But the drums specifically, the sound, the pop sound of that snare is like self-titled Korn or self-titled Slipknot. It was bringing me back to that. To go a little bit on the downside of this a little bit, there still is a lot of stuff that reminds me of a lot of things. Not that it's carbon copy, and I kind of proved myself wrong, because let me give you an example. A song like, which one was it? I'll give you a couple examples. Too Quick to Grieve has a part in it that I thought sounded like a part in Clown by Korn. And I went, okay, that sounds just like Clown. So I went, you know what, I'm gonna go play Clown and compare the two parts. So I played Clown, and I went, wait a second. It doesn't sound as much similar as I thought it did. It reminded me of it, but it is quite different. And I had a similar one with The Borderline of Pain, which is an interlude track. But I'm like, this sounds very, very, very familiar. Where am I hearing this from? And then I started thinking, I think it sounds like Get Your Gun by Marilyn Manson. So I put that song on, I'm like, wow, this is vastly different. So I'm either thinking of the wrong song, or I'm just completely wrong. Either way, I'm not holding a huge fault to this album for that, because even though it sounds like other things, it's reminding me of other things. And I got a list of things here that it reminded me of: bands, vocalists, different parts, riffs, whatever. I think these guys still did everything exceptionally well, and they made it different enough to, like, it's not a carbon copy, like I said, right? If it was more of a carbon copy, then I'd really have a problem with it, but it's not. It's just, like, I think you mentioned it, you put it in a good way last time. You said you can tell where the influences are. And I think that's not something you should fault an album for, just because you can tell where the influences are. And that's just also my own perception. Maybe they weren't influences of these guys. I have no fucking idea. They didn't come to me and say, hey, yeah, you're right, Vile, our influences were, you know, this, that, and the other. I don't know if I'm right or not, but you know,
Yeah,
it's just what I hear.
I think it's really cool that there's all these influences that you can kind of pick out, and I think the fact that you can hear so many different things together shows how fresh this album is. Like, I really think the fact that there's such a blend between nu metal and deathcore is super interesting, and it's something I don't really think I've ever heard before.
Yeah.
And I actually think Placenta is a really good example of how fresh and versatile this album is. You got the raw new, metal groove that, kind of reminds you of Korn, all right. You got this crazy thrashy guitar solo that's out of nowhere.
Which
and
is
then
awesome.
There's also a deathcore breakdown in it as well.
Yep.
And then there's sometimes where they break down the breakdowns, like in Kungen. And then on top of that, a song like We the Sad, that sick drum solo, I was listening to that song over the course of the week and I realized this solo really just comes out of nowhere. There's nothing that builds up to it. You got this one little bit going on that sounds really cool, and then it just disappears. You have this crazy solo, and then a breakdown happens. Like, what the fuck is going on? One thing I want to say about We the Sad and the Silo, actually, is that these two songs are the cool down of the album. Because you have, from the start all the way to LED, it's like lots of hard hitting, like really punch you in the face stuff. But the Silo and We the Sad both have a lot of space. But they both still retain the energy. It doesn't bring you down too much. It perfectly gives you some space to breathe, but also fits all the emotion of the album. Like, it's so well done. And then right after We the Sad, you have Too Quick to Grieve, which boom, bumps it right back up.
All right, so let's get to ratings. I'm gonna go first. I think this album is pretty exceptional. I think the fact that this band was able to take a sound that's 20 years old and make it sound fresh and new is a testament to their talents. So this album's gonna get a toe tag from me. I think it's well deserving.
All right, well, for me, I think this album is phenomenal. I loved it all week. Honestly, almost the entirety of this album is in my playlist at this point. It gets a toe tag from me. It's such a good album, man. It's the kind of album with grooves that are just crazy, awesome energy, just super well done, Tallah, on putting this album out. We both love it. 2 toe tags for Matriphagy, guys. That's all we got for you today, so remember to like the video if you liked it. Go check out Matriphagy. It's been out for almost a month. This album is super amazing, guys. Go check it out. Anyway, subscribe if you guys are new. I'm TV Fish.
And I'm Wild Self.
And we'll see you guys later.